Hello and welcome to a new episode of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John Blake.
And I'm Evan Grant. Each week on this weekly spinoff of the Dallas Morning News SportsDay Insider podcast, John and I will keep you up to date with the latest on this year's club, but we also started this show to have some fun, John.
So every week we're talking to a current or former Ranger and telling some stories from club history. This week that guest is one of the all-time Rangers fan favorites, Rusty Greer. And we'll also look back at first-round draft picks in the archives in Arlington.
If you're listening to your first episode and want to catch up with what you've missed, we've had great conversations with Michael Young, Mark Teixeira, Jake Berger, to name the first three.
And if you want to interact with the show, you can find us each on X. I'm at Ranger Blake, and Evan is at Evan_P_Grant. I love saying that.
You can also reach out to the Dallas Morning News on any of the paper's social media channels. And again, find the podcast in the SportsDay Insider feed, wherever you like to consume podcasts. Please, and send us any comments on X at either of those addresses, or you can email me at egrant@dallasnews.com.
Bottom of the ninth, bases loaded. Here comes Jimmy Dale from Baker Brothers Plumbing, AC, and Electrical.
Thanks, Chuck. When your home pitches curveballs, Baker Brothers knocks it out of the park.
Home run, Baker Brothers. Incredible.
As the official home service partner of your Texas Rangers, we're offering $300 off a tank or tankless water heater.
Another winning call. Visit callbakernow.com or dial 214-342-1171 today.
Baker Brothers.
Great service.
So we're going to start, as we always do, with talking about the week that was. The Rangers went 3-3 on the homestand with Toronto and St. Louis. They allowed only 8 runs in the 6 games, which is amazing. You can lose 3 games and do that. But, Evan, the big story, I think, was the Cardinals series, where they outscored St. Louis, who's having a really good year, 19-4, went 10 for 25 with runners in scoring position. The offense seemed to show finally maybe some signs of life.
Yeah, I thought the Sunday game was a really impressive game for me on a number of levels. It extended Marcus Semion's hot streak to 3 games. I think he went 7 for 8 in the series. Marcus did some things on the base pass, too, to advance himself and get himself into scoring position. And offensively as well, I think Josh Smith broke out of his slump on Sunday. And as we get this started, the Rangers should have Evan Carter back this week, so they should be as close to full strength as they've been in a long, long time. The one obvious missing piece right now is Adolis Garcia, but if the Rangers can give him some time to work through some things and work on cutting down the chase, I think that can in the long term be a beneficial element for them.
What do you think of what Sam Haggerty has done for the team? I mean, he brings a different element that they've had. He little team speed, just a kind of a different piece.
Well, if you're not slugging and you've got to figure out a way to manufacture runs, you need some guys with some tools, but also without much ego. And I think that's where Sam fits in. He's willing to do whatever it takes to help optimize a run scoring opportunity. What we saw is, we saw him on the bases, advance. We saw him bunt the ball. We saw a lot of things that just go into, I hate using the term small ball, but to me it's just opportunistic ball. And that's what I think the Rangers had lacked. I think you saw Sunday in the closing game, in this rubber game after the Rangers had this big breakout game on Friday and then got shut out on Saturday. You saw in the first inning, you saw St. Louis really optimize a run-scoring opportunity where they got a walk and they turned that into a run. The Rangers in the bottom half of the inning led off with a double, had 2 guys on with less than 2 outs, and didn't score either guy. And for me, that was the dichotomy of these 2 teams. St. Louis has had this hot streak by optimizing stuff, and the Rangers have struggled because they haven't slugged. But as the game went on, you saw this team take advantage of small things and make things happen on the bases. We saw Alejandro Osuna, who's obviously a quick runner, but we saw a guy go first to third on a single. And this has been a station-to-station team. And so they haven't advanced and put themselves into situations where sac flies will help them score. So I thought that on Sunday, this looked like a team that was functioning, maybe not as designed, but functioning in the way the game is being played today. Now the question is, look, they did it for 2 out of 3 days. They have got to start doing it for a longer period of time. But I thought that these 2 games over the weekend in which they bounced back from not scoring. Well, they started off with a big offensive night, and then they bounced back from not scoring, and they beat a playoff team. And I want to throw one stat out as soon as I finish this. But I thought that those 2 games were real building blocks. They now go Tampa, Washington, Minnesota. It's on the first 3-city trip of the year. That'll be a real test. There's some issues with how the rotation will hold up without Nathan Eovaldi for a while. But I do want to say this, John. I went back after they won 2 out of 3 against St. Louis, and I looked. This team is 10-18 against the teams that are holding playoff spots at this moment. And there's a little more than 100 games left in the season. They are 2-8 in those games in one-run decisions. So they could very easily be a 500 club against playoff teams, which is a very good sign. They've also only been outscored by 6 runs in those 28 games. So the run differential doesn't suggest what the record is. If you go down to the American League only, if you go down to their record against American League teams, they are 5-11 against the American League playoff teams, but they've had a 1-5 record in those games in one-run games, and the run differential is just -3. So my point in all this is they've played pretty well against the playoff teams. They've had some bad luck there. They've had some misfirings, but they are in every game against playoff caliber teams. And if this team can just put together a month, it can really make up some ground in the American League and in the AL West.
So you mentioned Adolis Garcia at the top when we were talking about, and Chris Young and Bruce Bochy have now said this is going to be a performance. It's a result-driven business here now with Adolis in terms of getting back into the lineup and going forward with this other outfield, maybe even the DH combination right now with Peterson out. How do you see that playing out? And I guess you'll just kind of have to see on this road trip.
I think you will have to see on this road trip a little bit. And look, Adolis will now have had 5 consecutive days off, with Monday's day off going into Tampa. I don't think they want to make him sit, a week before they play him again. But that will be a little bit of a feel thing for Bruce Bochy. I don't want to also boil Adolis Garcia down into a defensive replacement, but in games late, they can get him some at bats, and he's an asset defensively. He's playing the best defense of his career, so I think there's opportunities for him to get some at bats. The problem I've got right now with Adolis is it would be easy to say, let's just platoon him and play him against left-handed starters. Let's create the lefty versus righty thing. Well, the numbers against lefties this year have been worse than they've been against righties. I think that issues some trouble warnings. But I think the first step is to get him out of the lineup every day, try and break some muscle memory there or some mental issues where he's just chasing everything, and let's kind of start it all over. And I think that's where the Rangers are at right now.
Let's turn to the rotation a little bit. Obviously, the Eovaldi injury doesn't seem to be too serious. They were Chris Young saying on Sunday that they don't see him when he comes back. It probably won't be long term. Gives them a chance to get Kumar Rocker back in the rotation in Tampa Bay. But again, as I think we talked a little bit last week about protecting DeGrom and Eovaldi and guys like that.
I hear what you're saying, even though you're choking up a little bit. And I know that this pitching staff makes you emotional because it's been something the Rangers haven't had much of. But I do think, like, you look at the Eovaldi situation, and there's a couple of things here. Chris Young is going to be very proactive and very protective of the starting pitchers. Secondly, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with the idea that if there's any reason whatsoever where you can go a 10-day period or a 15-day period, I should say, without one of these starters. Now, once you start getting into multiple guys, then you run into an issue because there's a depth issue. But if you can do that and give these guys rest, because as we said a week ago, these guys are all on pace for over 180 innings, and most of them haven't thrown that much many times in their career, and certainly not in a long time. So I think that there is the opportunity to rest him here and give him a little bit of a break. It wouldn't surprise me if the same things happen with DeGrom and Tyler Mahle at some point in time. And the offshoot of all this is Kumar Rocker went out and pitched 7 innings on 2 rehab assignments. Last time out, he was 4 perfect innings and then walked a guy in the 5th to start it off. But obviously, you don't want to kind of activate Kumar after that and send him right back to the minors. I think this opportunity gives him a chance to come back up to the big leagues, show that he's made some progress, and is ready to be effective. And if not, it then does give him kind of a baseline to say, okay, these are the things I've got to work on. So, look, all of that has been great. And I just think that, we talk so much about these veteran starters. The development of Jack Leiter this year is a story unto itself because he's just taken an enormous stride forward this year. He also is a guy that the Rangers will have to be a little bit careful with on innings. I think the most he's ever pitched in a professional season is 112, and he's on pace for well over 150. So I think there will come a time, too, where the Rangers dial it back on him, but I can't speak loudly enough to the progress that Jack Leiter has made. It kind of gets overshadowed because the bullpen, the entire rotation has pitched so well. But look, Jack still qualifies as rookie. He's having a really good rookie season. Let's just put it that way.
So the Rangers, after they have 3 off days left for the season. 3 off days left before the All-Star break. Could you see a potential situation as like you're talking protecting innings that maybe you go with 6 starters at some point? You keep Rocker in there to try to protect these guys and give them an extra day of rest during this stretch?
I think basically, in June they've got an off day a week, pretty much. And that gives you the opportunity to give guys an extra day of rest between each start. I think it would take some roster manipulation probably to keep 6 starters all healthy at one point in time, but you could get away with it if you wanted to and piggyback a couple of guys. I think that will all play out. But look, if you have Kumar here and he pitches well enough, you certainly can. If there are guys who need maintenance or have some small issue. Look, DeGrom had a kind of a hot spot on his finger that maybe was a blister. If you need to give Jacob 2 weeks at some point in time to make sure his finger is good, you can do that and let Kumar step into his spot. So I think they do, as hard as it is to believe, given the fact that Cody Bradford and John Gray were both hurt for a significant amount of time, and both are on the way back. But given that they were hurt at the end of spring training and how dire it seemed the situation was for the rotation, right now we're sitting here and the Rangers have 6 guys for 5 spots.
So that's the week that was with the Rangers, and Evan will be heading out on the road to Tampa Bay and Washington. I don't think you're going to Minnesota, right?
I'm not going to Minnesota.
I don't know the last time Evan made a 3-city trip, so you usually will pick his spots a little bit. And
trying to keep my marriage intact.
Well, I can't blame you for that. So our guest on the podcast this week is former Rangers outfielder Rusty Greer, made one of the most iconic catchers in club history and whose run in the late 1990s helped power the team to its first 3 playoff appearances. We'll talk to him next. We are most happy to be joined on this week's edition of Sports Day Rangers by Rusty Greer, one of the, I think, most popular players, one of the most admired players in Rangers history. 10th round pick of the Rangers in 1990 out of Montevideo College, went on to hit .305 in 10 big league seasons, came up, was a key member of those teams from 1996 and the other two playoff teams in 98, 99, before injuries kind of derailed his career, and has gone on now to become a fairly successful high school baseball coach. So, Rusty, my first question to you, and thanks for joining us, is you'd been in the big leagues 3 years when Evan Grant came on the beat in 1997. And in those days, you were pretty quiet when you first came up. But what were your first impressions on Evan Grant as the beat writer bothering you most days?
Well, first off, thank you guys for having me. You guys are really a big part of my career, to be honest with you. And yeah, just thanks for having me. But no, it's when I first met Evan Grant, I didn't realize he was going to take as much pictures of food as he does and put it on the internet and on post and all that stuff. So he needs to be a food critic. That's what he needs to do.
It's my part-time job.
What, John, one of the you're right. I was quiet and I did the cliche speaking, and I probably have never told you this, but one of the biggest things that the Texas Rangers and you did for me, I don't know if you remember sending me to Lisa LeMaster.
Right. Yep.
That was the biggest thing for me in my career, because now when guys like Evan and TR and all those guys showed up, I could talk, and that was a big stepping stone for me in dealing with the press. And people don't realize when you go into a Yankee Stadium or a Fenway Park or something like that, you don't have there's not really a friend. So Evan's a friend, and all those guys that run around, the beat writers for the Rangers, were friends, and they talk to you, but you don't know what's gonna take place, and that really helped me deal with not just our beat writers, but the media across Major League Baseball.
You know, the first I remember spring training in Pompano in Port Charlotte in '97, and Fraley, the late great Jerry Fraley, Hall of Fame writer and my mentor, was showing me around, and I had asked him something about talking to Rusty, and he was like, "Don't talk to him. He's not going to say anything. He doesn't want to talk. Just leave him alone. Leave him to me." And so I don't think I talked to you like for the first half of that year. I was scared of you, basically, because it sounded like you just didn't want to talk to anybody.
Well, Jerry and I had and he was right. I didn't want to talk to anybody. It wasn't because I didn't want to. I didn't really know how. And but he and I had built a pretty good rapport, and really what from a player's perspective, if you don't trust the guy that's standing there taking your notes down, because you and I have been in situations that I said, "Hey man, I'm gonna share something with you, don't write it," and you said, "Okay." And once you build that rapport, then you open up a little bit more to certain people, and that was the way I felt about all you guys. At some point, once you learn to speak to the media, once you learn the people that are in your corner and you can trust, then you begin to open up a little bit. But yeah, for me, it was a struggle at first. I'll be honest with you.
I will say this: I don't want to sit here and just reminisce about '97, but two things that I thought that over your time with the Rangers and the last half of which I covered, I don't know that I recall a player making the transformation from being reticent about being quoted to being a team spokesman quite the way you did. It was nothing short of remarkable. And secondly, I thought Rusty had, John, I thought he had this innate ability, and I've told this to him before. This team had a number of guys in '95, '96 that he was around that had great elements of their personality for building a clubhouse chemistry, right? Will Clark had certain elements, and Dave Valley had certain elements, and you go around the room, Mark McLemore had certain elements. I thought that Rusty was, as he grew older, he was exceptional in taking the best parts of those people's personalities and molding them into who he was. And then not only that, I think that there is a line of leadership almost with this club. It may have ended with Elvis retiring and Adrian retiring, but I think it went back basically generations from Will to Rusty to Michael Young to Elvis and Adrian, and it lasted pretty much 20 years in some of the greatest years in this franchise's history. And he was a critical element in taking that and passing it on to Michael Young at an early point in time. What do you remember about, when this kid came over, when Michael came over and he was a young kid? What do you remember about what you needed to do with him to, I don't know, make him feel more at ease and feel more of a place in a big league clubhouse?
Well, you know what? I'll back up and I'll kind of second what you said. I was very observant in that clubhouse, and I really kind of knew my place. And people talk about a guy taking somebody under wing or whatever it may be. Well, I locked her next to Will for 5 years. Now, Will was, as we know, he was brash and abrupt at times. But I'll tell you this about Will Clark, and this is one thing I learned from him, is that it didn't matter what happened in that game. He could have been 0 for 4 with 5 strikeouts.
If he was 0 for 4 with 5 strikeouts, that would have been worth writing about.
0 for 5 with 5 strikeouts. Sorry. He was always in his seat answering questions. He never shied away, never ran away. And I watched that. I watched Mark McLemore have a good time with the media. I watched Dave Valley be the consummate pro at dealing with the media. And so a lot of what went on, I observed and watched and knew that at some point I was going to have to be the guy that spoke. And so I learned from a Will Clark. Didn't matter what happened in the game, I was there answering questions. I learned from Mark McLemore to be able to joke around with the media. Dave Valley to treat it like a business and a profession. And so there were things that went on that kind of prepped me for the role I would have to fill down the road. As far as Michael goes, anytime you come to big leagues, you're not sure what place you fit or where you fit in. But at that point, it was myself and Michael and Bill Hasselman, Frank Catalanato, Gabe Kapler. We always kind of hung out together. And so I think Billy Hasselman is a good example of a really good behind-the-scenes leader. All those guys helped transition from a Michael Young and a young player, not knowing where he fit in, to understanding that he is a big part of not just the team, but the clubhouse.
Now, just backing up just a little bit, you were not a highly regarded prospect. When we drafted you, you just kind of kept playing well in the minor leagues. And in 1994, even though the Rangers were in contention, we had a losing record. Rusty only played 31 games at Triple-A. We bring him up. That 94 club could be called dysfunctional, I think, to some extent, and then the strike hits. But of all the players of that era that going into what the first championship run was, I think Johnny Oates may have had as big an impact on you as any one of those players. Would you kind of agree with that when we hired him for the 95 season?
I wouldn't just agree with it. I would say that is 100% spot on. Johnny Oates, he came along at the right time in my career. And when I say that, I mean, in 94 I get called up. I do well, and I come back in 95, and I'm expecting to be a starter in spring training. I'll tell you guys a couple things that people don't really know. Spring training, we have the meeting before, and Johnny, what people don't know about Johnny is he had his team set before we had the first pitch in spring training. And he would say, well, we have two backup positions open, and they're these positions, and basically good luck, work hard, good luck. But he knew who he was going to take. And so in 95, we go out there, we have our meeting. He goes, I got 2 spots open. It's right field and second base. And I was the right fielder in 94, had done well, and Jeff Fry was the second baseman. I kind of looked around and go, what do I have to do here? And so, but Johnny was a veteran players manager. And so then we moved into the 95 season, and I'm platooning. I'm platooning with Jack Voigt and Candy Maldonado. But yet any time that I would get pinch hit for in the 5th inning if a left-hander came on the mound, but I would start against Andy Pettit or Randy Johnson or any of those guys, and I was kind of confused about what a platoon player was. But then at the end of 95, we played the Mariners at home, the last game of the year. And so we're walking up the tunnel, and I'm in front of Johnny about maybe 5 feet. And remember in the old ballpark, there was that little foyer that you come up from the clubhouse. There's that little foyer there, then you walk into the clubhouse. He stopped me there, and he said, I know you're not a platoon player. I'm moving one to right next year, and you're going to play left field every day.
I think we've talked about this some, Rusty, in previous conversations, but I do wonder, when I look back at all of the injuries, you went all out. There was zero regard for injury or concern about your health, and I know that's the way you played the game. Have you ever, since you walked away, have you ever regretted any of that and said, maybe if I'd have been a little bit more careful, I'd have extended my career some?
100%. Think about. I wish I was still playing today, and really, that's people say you move on, you do this, but baseball is my identity, and so I wish I was still doing it today. And you asked me a question one time, and it was way back when, and you basically asked that: do you think the way you play will shorten your career? And at that point, I'm 26, 27 years old, and you can't get nothing can go wrong with you. And I'm like, nah, that's just how I am. Looking back on it, I wouldn't have changed the way I played. I wouldn't have changed the things I did. What I would change is maybe having that surgery in the off season that somebody said I might have needed to have. Doing some things different. And back then it's not the same today when it comes to injuries and stuff, because when you're locked in next to Will Clark, you go and you strap your cleats on, you play no matter what. And so that's where I grew up, is in that era, in that clubhouse. And so that's what I did. Second thing is I didn't want to take a chance on anybody taking my job. I'd worked my rear end off and wanted to be a big leaguer my whole life. I'm locked in next to my childhood hero, and I'm going to do everything I can to play every day, and I'll deal with it later. But looking back on it, there's probably some things I could have done different. And do I regret it? No, I don't. I wish I was still doing it, though.
So prior to the 2003 season, I don't ever remember in my career having to announce an injury report prior to a season that we had to do with Rusty, when we basically announced, well, he's got to have these 4 surgeries if he wants to come back, and he's going to miss the entire 2003 season. And this was in either late January, it was before we went to spring training. What was your feeling at that point? And did you, and then you did try to come back. Your intention was to play in 2004. I remember that, when you needed another surgery. But what was kind of your mindset at that point, Rusty? Because, we shocked a lot of people. I remember when we put this out that, he's done for he cannot play this season because he's got to have all these different surgeries to be able to play baseball again.
It was from my standpoint, it was devastating, because you're right. You hadn't had to worry about that. I went and played every day, and you didn't know. Sometimes you knew I was hurt, sometimes you didn't. But I think it's a result of everything that's stacked up all at one time. And for me, my mindset was, okay, I'm going to go and have these surgeries. It can't be that bad. I'm going to rehab and come back and be ready. Well, they drug on, and then I had to have another one. And so then the mindset becomes, am I ever going to get to play again? And so then you go and you try to come back, and then you can't feel the mindset started going from, this is not going to be an issue, to, will I ever get to do it again?
I actually sat in on one of those surgeries. I was in the room when you had, I think it was the elbow surgery, right? The UCL?
Yeah. Well, you got to remember, too, that I didn't have the best throwing mechanics. I didn't have the best of anything. And so that's part of the reason all that happened. And but so you were in there, you saw what went on, and it was disappointing, man.
I was going to write this big heroic story about coming back from the surgery, and unfortunately, I didn't get to do it. That was the sad part about that. All right, this would not be a conversation between you and I if we didn't get into some grumpy old ex-ball player stuff. So, have you watched any baseball in the last couple of years at the major league level? And what's your thoughts on where offenses are at this point?
And I'm not a grumpy old Meyer was better guy.
Only with me you are. You're just grumpy at me.
Right. My mind has been changed in some areas. I don't watch a lot of professional baseball. I watch Bobby Witt and some of the guys that Mason went to college with, who are now making their way to the big leagues. I'll follow them a little bit. But typically where I spend my time watching baseball is college baseball, like the regionals are going on, super regionals are coming this next weekend. So that's what I follow. And one reason I don't watch it is because I don't like the way the game is played from that perspective you're talking about, the offensive perspective of a batting average doesn't matter, and there's only certain things that matter, and we can agree to disagree, but on some level, all those numbers matter, and there's ways to get that done. Some people are better at hitting home runs than others. I'm not sure that I would have played in today's game because I wasn't a home run guy. I didn't strike out. I did strike out, but not 150 times a year. I hit for an average. I scored runs. I think that the philosophy of the game has changed, and not necessarily in a bad way. I just think there's a hybrid that can take place versus some clubs use a lot of data and a lot of numbers, and some clubs try to mirror or blend the two. And I'm more along the lines of blending the two and playing the game from a natural standpoint than just strictly numbers.
We appreciate your time, Rusty, but we have to end with Evan's 5 questions. So fire away, Evan.
Rusty, you played in an era where we didn't have all that scoreboard stuff, and there weren't all those cute little questionnaires or this or that, though I tried to do that with you guys. So here's 5 quick questions to better get to know a Rangers legend. I want your first thought answers that come to mind. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. What's the best sandwich? Have you ever personally asked for an autograph, and if so, who?
Personally, I have. It was John Hanna in 1970-something when I was a young kid.
Played at Alabama, right? Bull Hanna?
Alabama and
yeah,
the Patriots.
a great player for the Patriots.
Offensive lineman, right?
Yep.
Favorite sports memory that does not involve you?
Sports memory does not involve me. When Mason Greer hit his first collegiate home run
At Missouri State?
at McLennan.
Okay.
Or I'm going to back up and say when they won the junior college national championship too. That was good.
Okay. First concert?
Reba McEntire.
I was thinking it would have been Leonard Skinner, but that's another story. Describe the rest of your life in 5 words, Rusty.
I hope to have an impact.
That's nice. That's meaningful and profound.
There you go.
Rusty, thank you for joining us. Was this painful?
No, not at all. I'm like I said, you guys are a big part of my life, and I don't mind whatever you guys need. All you gotta do is let me know.
Well, we appreciate it, and again, like you said, it with Rusty, as we've talked about, it was really great for me to watch his growth as a major league player and working with the media, because he was like the go-to guy for our media by the time, those other guys, Will left and those guys, and when you're a PR guy, those things are pretty meaningful. So
when you're a beat guy, they are too. Thank you, Rusty.
So thanks, Rusty. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that.
Well, this week's episode of the Archives in Arlington, we're going to talk about overall first-round draft picks. And this is the week, June 5th, that this franchise, the Washington, Texas franchise, have had 2 overall number 1 picks in the draft. They were both selected in the draft on June 5th. The first was back in 1969 with the expansion Senators. It was outfielder Jeff Burroughs, out of Woodrow Wilson High School in Long Beach, California. And he went on to play 16 years in the big leagues at 240 home runs. Had his biggest impact, probably, you Braves fan, he played well for the Braves.
77 or 78.
Right,
he drove
and he drove in a lot of runs. But prior to that, he was the 1974 American League Most Valuable Player for the famed Turnaround Gang.
Turnaround Gang.
And so he had a real impact on this franchise. He got very frustrated playing at Arlington Stadium. It was before they had closed it in with the billboards in 1984. And he figures he lost 10 home runs a year in this ballpark, so he wasn't that upset when he finally got traded. The other one everybody knows is 1973. Left-handed pitcher David Clyde out of Westchester High School in Houston. And the Rangers pretty much ruined his career, brought him right to the big leagues as an 18-year-old high school player. Made his major league debut that year on June 27th against the Twins. Was the first sellout in club history. Clyde ended up going 18-33 in 5 seasons with Texas and the Indians. And David was very bitter for a lot of years with this franchise. But we brought him back last year, which was the 50th anniversary, believe it or not, of his major league debut. And I think he really did appreciate it. 50 years is a long time, and it would have been great to see what David Clyde could have done with the right development in the minor leagues and everything. So those are the 2 overall number 1 picks the Rangers have had and have played for the Rangers. So my trivia question for Evan Grant today is, there are 4 other overall number 1 picks who have played for the Texas Rangers at some points in their career. And I told him he's covered 3 of them, and the other one was a Hall of Famer. Can you name those 4 players?
I think I've got the 3 that I covered. I'm going to go with, in order, Alex Rodriguez.
Right. Seattle Mariners.
Josh Hamilton.
Correct, with Tampa Bay Rays in 99.
And Matt Bush.
Matt Bush is the tough one. 2004 with San Diego when he was drafted as an infielder and later made the move to the mound, and everybody knows the Matt Bush story, and he was actually fairly productive for the Rangers for 2 or 3 years. So you don't know who the 4th one is.
The 4th one is a Hall of Famer who played for the Rangers.
You did not cover.
My guess here is I've got 2 names written down. I'm going to go with Harold Baines.
Excellent. Very good. Very good.
He was the first overall pick?
Yes.
Okay.
For the Chicago White Sox.
I didn't realize he was the
back
first
out
overall
of
pick.
St. Michael's, Maryland. And Harold was traded here in 1989 in the famous Sammy Sosa, Wilson Alvarez trade. Harold was not a big fan of Arlington, Texas, or Bobby Valentine, and we traded him promptly to the Oakland A's at the trade in September of the next year. So that is this week's Archives in Arlington, and we want to thank you for joining us on SportsDay Rangers.
Don't forget to check out more sports content from the Dallas Morning News, either in print or on the website. It's dallasnews.com, or via the SportsDay Insider podcast with Kevin Sherrington, myself, and usually a guest from the SportsDay staff to discuss ongoing topics from the Cowboys to the Wings to everything in between here in DFW.
And we do encourage you to interact with the show, and you can find both of us on X at Ranger Blake and then Evan P. Grant.
You forgot the underscores.
The underscores.
And I do want to say also, look, you can email me at egrant@dallasnews.com. Really do want your comments, your questions. If you've got questions that you'd like to have answered on the show, please email me at egrant@dallasnews.com, and I'll get them, and we will proceed to tackle them. Want to thank Rusty Greer for joining us this week. Want to thank our producer, Chris Blake, and our visual and special assistant, David Guzman. And we will talk to you next week.